I remember the moment everything changed. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon, the kind of day that felt dreary and heavy, the clouds hanging low as if they were mourning something they couldn't quite name. I had just come home from work, tired and ready to unwind. The smell of something baking wafted through the air, a familiar comfort that had always welcomed me home. My wife, Sarah, was in the kitchen, her back turned to me as she stirred a pot on the stove. I smiled, thinking about how lucky I was, how perfect our life seemed. But that day, my world tilted on its axis. It started with a phone call. My friend Mark, a guy who had always been a little too nosy for his own good, sounded different when he called. There was an urgency in his voice, a hesitance that made my stomach drop. "Hey, John, I need to talk to you about something. It's about Sarah." I felt the blood drain from my face. Mark had always been protective of me, and the way he said her name sent alarm bells ringing in my head. The words spilled out of him like a dam breaking, and I couldn't process what he was saying. Sarah had been seen with another man, multiple times, in places I thought were ours alone. A pit formed in my stomach as I listened, disbelief overshadowing my every thought. When I hung up the phone, everything around me felt distorted. I walked into the kitchen, the sound of the pot bubbling now a cruel reminder of the domestic life I thought we shared. Sarah turned, her smile brightening the room, but it felt like a spotlight illuminating a dark secret. "Hey, honey, how was your day?" Her voice was light, carefree, as if nothing had changed. I was about to shatter that illusion. "Sit down," I said, my voice steady, even as my heart raced. Her expression shifted, confusion clouding her features as she placed the wooden spoon down and turned to face me. "Is everything okay?" "No," I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. "Everything is not okay. I just got a call from Mark." And there it was, the moment of truth. I watched as the color drained from her face, the flicker of panic in her eyes confirming all my worst fears. "John, just don't. I want you to tell me the truth. How long has this been going on?" Her silence spoke volumes. The way she avoided my gaze, the way her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the counter, it all painted a picture of guilt that was impossible to ignore. "I can explain," she finally said, her voice small, almost pleading. "Explain? What is there to explain? You've been lying to me for God knows how long." My chest tightened with every word. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. I watched as tears pooled in her eyes, and for a brief moment I felt a flicker of empathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by the anger and confusion swirling inside me. The life we had built together, the trust we had nurtured, all of it felt like a lie. "I was lonely, John. You were always working, and Is that really your excuse? You had to go find another man." The confrontation spiraled into chaos, each accusation tearing at the fabric of our relationship. I felt a mix of rage and heartbreak, a storm of emotions that left me reeling. I had given her my heart, my trust, and she had shattered it without a second thought. As I stood there watching her crumble, I realized I had a choice to make. I could continue to let this betrayal define me, or I could take control. The thought ignited something within me, a determination to ensure that she would never hide anything from me again. I had to act. The question was how. In the days that followed the confrontation, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. I felt like I was living in a fog, everything around me dulled and muted. I went through the motions of daily life, work, chores, and the occasional forced conversation with Sarah. But inside, I was a storm. Each moment I spent with her was a reminder of the trust that had been broken, and every smile she tried to offer felt like a slap in the face. I found myself replaying memories, moments that once felt warm and safe now tainted by betrayal. I remembered our wedding day, the way she looked in her white dress, radiant and full of hope. I remembered the lazy Sundays we spent curled up on the couch, watching movies and sharing popcorn. I thought about the vacations we took, the laughter we shared, and the dreams we built together. All of it felt like a mirage, an illusion that had evaporated into thin air. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to process my anger. I could no longer deny that I was hurt, that I had been living a lie. The question of why loomed over me like a dark cloud. Why had she done this? Why hadn't I seen the signs? The answers eluded me, slipping through my fingers like grains of sand. I started to pay closer attention to Sarah, observing her every move. She was still my wife, yet she felt like a stranger. I watched as she tried to mend things, bringing me coffee in the morning, attempting to engage me in conversation, and even suggesting couples counseling. But I wasn't ready for that. I needed to figure out my next steps before I could even consider forgiveness. One night while scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon a picture that made my blood boil. It was a photo of Sarah with him, her lover, laughing and enjoying. A day at the park. The caption read, "Best day ever with my favorite person." My heart raced with rage and I felt a surge of adrenaline course through me. I knew then that I had to act and I had to act decisively. I began to devise a plan. I wanted to expose her betrayal not just to myself but to the world. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, the consequences of her choices. It was a dark thought, but it felt necessary. I thought about how she had hidden her affair for so long, how she had manipulated our lives and our love. I wouldn't let her continue to deceive me or anyone else. I reached out to Mark, the friend who had initially tipped me off. I needed his help to gather information about her affair. I explained my plan to him, and while he hesitated at first, he eventually agreed to assist. He had seen the toll this betrayal had taken on me, and he was willing to do whatever it took to help me regain control. The next few weeks were spent gathering evidence. Mark and I followed Sarah discreetly, capturing moments that confirmed her infidelity. We took pictures, recorded conversations, and compiled a timeline. With each piece of evidence, my resolve grew stronger. I was no longer the victim. I was the one in control. As I collected this information, I also began to change my approach to my relationship with Sarah. I was no longer the husband who would smile and nod as she tried to smooth things over. I became distant, cold even. I wanted her to feel the consequences of her actions, to understand that trust was not something that could easily be rebuilt. The emotional distance I created was both a shield and a weapon. I watched her struggle to comprehend the shift in my demeanor. She would ask if I was okay, if I wanted to talk, but I would simply shrug her off. I could see the confusion in her eyes, the realization that I was no longer the man she once knew. It was a necessary step in my plan, a way to prepare her for the fallout that was coming. I knew that the moment I revealed the truth would be pivotal. I wanted to ensure that when I did, it would shatter her world the same way she had shattered mine. The thought of her face when the truth came to light filled me with a sense of satisfaction. I was no longer the passive partner in this relationship. I was taking back my power. As I continued my investigation, I also reflected on what I wanted from this situation. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted clarity. I wanted to understand the depths of her betrayal and the reasons behind it. I needed to confront her with the truth, to force her to acknowledge the choices she had made. Each day, I felt myself growing stronger, more resolute. I was no longer the man who had been blindsided by love. I was a man with a mission, and I wouldn't stop until I had uncovered every detail of her deception. The time for confrontation was approaching, and I could feel the anticipation building within me. I was ready to expose her, to make sure she would never hide anything from me again. The day of reckoning finally arrived. I had spent countless hours preparing for this moment, and now it was time to put my plan into action. I felt a mix of anxiety and excitement coursing through me as I paced in our living room, the weight of the evidence I had gathered heavy in my pocket. I had printed the photos, compiled the messages, and organized the timeline. Each piece of paper felt like a testament to her betrayal, a reminder of the trust she had shattered. Sarah had been acting unusually cheerful that morning, making breakfast and humming to herself as she prepared our usual meal. I could see the contrast between her demeanor and the storm brewing inside me. The sight of her carefree attitude, oblivious to the chaos she had caused, only fueled my resolve. I forced myself to maintain a neutral expression as I sat at the table, pushing the food around on my plate while she chatted about her plans for the day. "Are you excited for dinner tonight?" she asked, her eyes bright with anticipation. "I thought we could try that new Italian place downtown." Yeah, sure, I replied, my voice lacking enthusiasm. I could feel the tension building between us, a palpable energy that was almost electric. As the day wore on, I felt like a coiled spring ready to unleash the truth. After work, I told her I wanted to talk. Her expression shifted, a flicker of concern crossing her face. I could tell she sensed something was off, but she had no idea what was coming. We sat down in the living room, the atmosphere thick with unspoken words. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. I've been doing some thinking, Sarah, about us, about everything. Okay, she said slowly, her brow furrowing as she braced herself for what was to come. I know about the affair, I said, my voice steady but firm. Her reaction was immediate, a mixture of shock and denial washing over her features. What are you talking about? She stammered, her eyes wide. That's not true. Don't lie to me, Sarah. I have proof. I pulled out the photos and messages, laying them out on the coffee table between us. Each image, each word was a dagger aimed at the heart of our relationship. I watched her face as she took in the evidence, the color draining from her cheeks. John, please, you have to understand it was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen. Her voice was a desperate plea, but I felt no sympathy. A mistake? You call this a mistake? I gestured to the photos, my anger boiling over. You've been hiding this from me for years. You've betrayed me, our marriage, everything we've built together. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I almost felt a flicker of empathy. But then I remembered the pain, the betrayal, and the anger that had fueled my desire for revenge. I wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. I can't believe you would do this to me, I continued, my voice rising. You thought you could just keep lying, keep pretending everything was fine while you were living a double life. John, I was lonely. You were always working and I felt neglected. I made a terrible choice, but I love you. Love, is that what you call this? I snapped, gesturing to the evidence again. You think love means betraying your partner. You think love means lying and sneaking around. She was sobbing now, her hands trembling as she covered her face. I know. I messed up. I'm so sorry. Please, can we just talk about this? I'll do anything to make it right. Anything, I echoed, the bitterness in my voice thick. You think I can just forgive and forget? You think I can pretend this never happened? No, Sarah, you've crossed a line and now you'll have to live with the consequences. The confrontation continued, each word a fresh wound. I felt a sense of power, a control I hadn't felt in weeks. I was no longer the victim, I was the one calling the shots. But even as I reveled in this newfound strength, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was playing a dangerous game. As our conversation reached a fever pitch, I decided it was time to take things further. I want everyone to know the truth, I declared, my voice firm. I want your friends, your family, everyone to know what you've done. Her eyes widened in horror. No, please, John, don't do that. You'll ruin everything. Everything is already ruined, Sarah. You did this to yourself. I felt a sense of satisfaction wash over me as I watched her panic. This was my revenge, my way of ensuring she could never hide again. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to understand the pain she had caused not just to me but to everyone around her. I'll make sure everyone knows, I repeated, my voice cold and unyielding. You wanted to live a double life, fine, but you'll have to face the consequences of your choices. In that moment, I realized that I was no longer just seeking revenge. I was reclaiming my life. I was taking back the power she had stolen from me, and I would make sure she would never hide anything from me or anyone else ever again. As I stood up to leave, I could see the fear in her eyes, the realization that she had lost control. I felt a sense of finality wash over me, a clarity that I hadn't experienced before. I was ready to move forward, ready to embrace the chaos that lay ahead. This was just the beginning. In the days following our confrontation, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and dread. I had unleashed the truth, and now I was faced with the fallout. I had made my intentions clear to Sarah, and while part of me reveled in the power of exposure, another part of me was terrified of what would come next. The thought of revealing her affair to our friends and family loomed over me like a dark cloud, but I knew it was necessary. She had taken everything from me, and I needed to ensure she understood the gravity of her actions. I spent hours contemplating how to execute my plan. I wanted the revelation to hit hard, to resonate with everyone involved. I decided to host a small gathering at our home, a casual dinner with our closest friends. It would be the perfect setting to unveil the truth, a way to ensure that everyone would hear it at once. I envisioned the shock on their faces, the disbelief, and the questions that would follow. As the day of the gathering approached, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I had been the victim for too long, and now it was time to reclaim my narrative. I sent out invitations, carefully choosing my words to keep it light and casual. Sarah didn't suspect a thing, still trying to mend the rift between us, making me coffee and suggesting we invite a few more friends. I nodded along, hiding my true intentions behind a mask of indifference. The night of the gathering arrived, and our home was filled with the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses. Friends filtered in, each one greeting me with smiles and warm hugs. I played my part, engaging in small talk, sharing jokes, and pretending that everything was fine. But inside, I was a whirlwind of anticipation, the moment of truth drawing closer. Sarah flitted around the room, pouring wine and chatting animatedly with our guests. I watched her, a mix of anger and sadness washing over me. She was acting as if nothing had happened, as if our lives hadn't been irrevocably altered. I felt a surge of frustration, but I kept my composure. I had to wait for the right moment. As dinner was served, I could feel the tension building. I cleared my throat and the room quieted, all eyes turning to me. "I'd like to say a few words," I began, my voice steady. "Thank you all for coming tonight. It means a lot to have such great friends around us." I paused, gauging the reactions of those gathered. Sarah smiled, her eyes sparkling, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "But there's something important I need to share with all of you, something that's been weighing heavily on me." I glanced at Sarah, her expression shifting from joy to confusion. "What are you talking about, John?" she whispered, a hint of panic creeping into her voice. I ignored her and continued. "For those of you who don't know, my wife Sarah has been unfaithful." The words hung in the air like a lead balloon, the silence that followed deafening. Gasps erupted around the room, and I could see shock etched on the faces of our friends. "John, stop," Sarah pleaded, her voice trembling. "You don't have to do this." But I pressed on, fueled by a mix of anger and vindication. "She's been having an affair for years. I have proof, photos, messages, everything." I gestured to the table where I had laid out the evidence, the images stark and damning. The room erupted into chaos, voices overlapping. As people tried to process what I had just revealed, Sarah's face turned pale, and I could see the realization of her actions crashing down on her. Friends turned to her in disbelief, demanding answers. "Is this true, Sarah?" one of our mutual friends asked, her voice laced with shock. "How could you do this?" I made a mistake." Sarah stammered, her composure crumbling as she faced the onslaught of questions. "It was a moment of weakness. I love John." The cacophony of voices grew louder, and I felt a sense of satisfaction as I watched her squirm under the weight of her betrayal. This was what I had wanted, to expose her, to make her confront the reality of her choices. I felt a surge of power, a sense of control that had been absent for so long. But as the chaos unfolded, I also felt a pang of guilt. These were our friends, people who cared about us, and here I was, dragging them into our personal hell. Yet I reminded myself that I wasn't the one who had chosen to betray our marriage. I wasn't the one who had hidden the truth for years. As the night wore on, I watched as Sarah struggled to defend herself, her words falling on deaf ears. The trust that had once existed between her and our friends was shattered, replaced by disbelief and disappointment. I felt a mix of satisfaction and sorrow as the reality of her actions settled in. By the time the last guest left, the atmosphere in our home was heavy with tension. I could feel the weight of my decision hanging in the air, and I knew there was no going back. Sarah stood in the living room, tears streaming down her face, her shoulders shaking as she tried to process what had just happened. "John, how could you do this?" she sobbed, her voice filled with anguish. "You've ruined everything." I took a deep breath, the adrenaline from the evening still coursing through me. "You did this to yourself, Sarah. You chose to betray me. I just made sure everyone knew the truth." Her sobs echoed in the silence, and I felt a pang of remorse. I hadn't wanted to hurt her this deeply, but I also knew that the truth had to come out. She needed to understand the impact of her choices, the pain she had caused. As I turned to leave the room, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. I had taken control of my narrative, exposed the betrayal, and reclaimed my power. But the road ahead would be long and complicated. Trust, once shattered, was not easily rebuilt, and I had no idea where we would go from here. I knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one that would be filled with challenges and revelations. I was ready to face whatever came next, determined to ensure that Sarah would never hide anything from me, or anyone else, ever again. The aftermath of that evening was like a heavy fog settling over our lives. In the days that followed, I felt as if I were navigating through a thick haze of confusion and anger. Friends who had once been our allies now looked at us with pity or judgment, and the air between Sarah and me was thick with unspoken words. The exposure had done its job. She was no longer able to hide her affair, but the consequences were far-reaching, affecting not just our relationship but the very fabric of our social circle. Sarah's attempts to reach out to me were met with my cold indifference. I had drawn a line, and I wasn't ready to let her cross it. She tried to explain herself, to apologize, but I was no longer interested in her excuses. I had given her every opportunity to be honest with me, and she had chosen deceit. The trust that had once bound us was shattered beyond repair, and I was determined to keep my distance. I found solace in my friends, those who had rallied around me during this storm. They offered support, understanding, and a listening ear. Mark was particularly helpful, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this fight. "You did what you had to do, John," he told me one evening over drinks. "You're not the bad guy here. She made her choices." His words struck a chord, reinforcing my resolve. I had taken control of my narrative, and I wasn't going to let Sarah's betrayal define me. But as I immersed myself in the support of my friends, I couldn't shake the feeling of loss. Our home felt different, the walls echoing with memories of laughter and love that now felt tainted by betrayal. One evening I found myself alone in the living room, the silence pressing down on me. I glanced at the framed photos on the wall, snapshots of happier times that now felt like relics from a different life. I picked one up, a picture of us at the beach, sun-kissed and carefree. The sight made my heart ache, a reminder of what I had lost. I placed it back down, feeling a surge of anger. How could she have thrown it all away? But as the days turned into weeks, I began to realize that I had a choice to make. I could continue to wallow in anger and resentment, or I could start to rebuild my life. I had taken the first step by exposing Sarah's betrayal, but now I needed to focus on my own healing. I enrolled in a few classes at a local community center, cooking, photography, and even a writing workshop. It was a way to distract myself, to immerse myself in new experiences and meet new people. I found joy in the little things, rediscovering passions that had been overshadowed by the chaos of my marriage. I took long walks, explored new neighborhoods, and even started volunteering at a local shelter. Each day felt like a step toward reclaiming my identity, my sense of self. Despite my efforts to move on, Sarah was still a constant presence in my life. She would leave messages, trying to reach out, trying to understand if there was any chance for reconciliation. I read each message with a mix of anger and sadness, knowing that while I had exposed her betrayal, I had also exposed the remnants of a life we had built together. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to face her, and I didn't know if I ever would be. But as I continued to distance myself from her, I also began to notice changes in her. She seemed to be struggling, not just with the fallout of her actions, but with the reality of being alone. I would catch glimpses of her in the neighborhood, looking lost and defeated. I felt a pang of sympathy, but I quickly pushed it aside. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. One evening, as I sat at a cafe, sipping coffee and scribbling in my notebook, I saw Sarah walk by. She looked different, hollow and fragile, her eyes devoid of the spark they once held. I felt a mix of emotions wash over me, anger, pity, and a strange sense of closure. She was no longer the woman I had loved. She was a shadow of her former self, a reminder of a life that had once felt perfect. I debated whether to approach her to offer some semblance of comfort, but I quickly dismissed the idea. I had worked too hard to distance myself from the pain. I wasn't ready to step back into that world. Instead, I watched her walk away, a part of me wishing her well even as another part felt vindicated by her struggles. As the weeks turned into months, I began to rebuild my life piece by piece. I found a new routine, filled my days with activities that brought me joy, and surrounded myself with supportive friends. I started to feel like myself again, the anger slowly giving way to acceptance. I had faced the truth, confronted my demons, and emerged stronger on the other side. But the question of Sarah lingered. In the back of my mind, would I ever be able to forgive her? Could we ever find a way back to one another? The answers remained elusive, but I knew one thing for certain. I had taken control of my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me again. As I sat in that cafe, pen in hand, I realized that the story wasn't over. This was just one chapter in my life, and I was ready to turn the page. I would continue to write my story, not as a victim of betrayal, but as a survivor who had faced the storm and emerged stronger. I was ready for whatever came next. As the months continued to unfold, I found a strange sense of peace settling over me. The chaos that had once dominated my life began to recede, and I finally felt like I was emerging from the shadows of betrayal. I had reclaimed my routine, built new friendships, and even rediscovered passions I had long forgotten. Life felt vibrant again, filled with possibilities. However, the specter of Sarah still lingered on the periphery of my life. I would occasionally hear from mutual friends about her struggles, how she was trying to pick up the pieces of her life after the fallout. I felt a mix of emotions, sympathy, anger, and a lingering sense of betrayal. It was a complicated web, and I wasn't sure how to navigate it. Then one evening I received a message from her. It was simple, yet it carried a weight that made my heart race. "Can we talk? I need to explain myself, and I want to apologize properly. I understand if you don't want to, but I hope you'll consider it." I stared at my phone, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to continue moving forward without looking back. But another part of me felt drawn to the idea of closure. After everything we had been through, perhaps it was time to face her one last time. I agreed to meet her at a small park where we used to walk together. The nostalgia hit me hard as I approached the familiar spot, memories flooding back, laughing, holding hands, sharing dreams. But now the weight of those memories felt like a burden, a reminder of everything that had been lost. When I saw her, my breath caught in my throat. Sarah looked different, her eyes were tired, and there was a vulnerability about her that I hadn't seen before. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, but it was her demeanor that struck me. The confident woman I had known was gone, replaced by someone who seemed to be grappling with the consequences of her actions. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I know this is difficult for you." I nodded, unsure of what to say. I had spent months building walls around my heart, and now I was faced with the woman who had shattered it. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued, her eyes searching mine for understanding. "I know I hurt you deeply. I can't tell you how sorry I am. I was selfish, and I let my loneliness cloud my judgment. I never meant to hurt you." Her words hung in the air, and I felt a mix of anger and sadness bubbling within me. "You say you're sorry, but how do I know it's genuine? How do I know you won't do it again?" I understand your hesitation. I don't expect forgiveness right away. I just want you to know that I take full responsibility for my actions. I've been seeing a therapist to work through my issues, and I'm trying to become a better person. I wanted to believe her, but the scars of betrayal ran deep. "It's going to take more than words, Sarah. You broke my trust, and that's not something that can be easily repaired." "I know," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not asking you to forget. I just wanted to be honest with you about my struggles and to apologize for the pain I caused. If there's any chance for us to rebuild, I want to work for it." The weight of her words pressed down on me, and I realized that I had to confront my own feelings. I had spent so long focusing on the anger and hurt that I hadn't allowed myself to consider the possibility of healing. "I don't know if we can go back to how things were," I admitted, my voice steady but filled with uncertainty. But I appreciate your honesty. It's a start." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I don't expect us to jump back into a relationship. I just wanted you to know that I'm committed to making amends, whatever that looks like." As we talked, I found myself reflecting on the journey we had taken. It wasn't just about her betrayal, it was about my own growth. I had transformed from a man who felt powerless to someone who had reclaimed his strength. "Thank you for being willing to talk," I said finally, feeling a sense of closure wash over me. "I still need time to process everything, but I appreciate you reaching out." We parted ways that day with an understanding that the road ahead would be complex. Sarah had taken a step toward accountability, and I had taken a step toward acceptance. In the weeks that followed, I continued to focus on my own healing. I embraced the new experiences I had cultivated, and I learned to trust myself again. I realized that I didn't need to hold onto the anger. It was okay to let go and move forward, whether that meant building a new life without Sarah or finding a way to reconnect. As I sat in my favorite cafe one afternoon, writing in my notebook and sipping my coffee, I felt a sense of clarity. The past would always be a part of me, but it didn't have to define my future. I was ready for whatever came next, whether it was a new relationship or a deeper understanding of myself. Life was unpredictable, but I had faced the storm and emerged stronger. I had taken control of my narrative, and for the first time in a long time I felt hopeful about the future. And in that moment, I knew that I was finally free. This was my story, and I was the one writing it.